and he offered me, I'm not making this up, $1 billion in stock options. And I looked at the opportunity and I said, this is going to be the best opportunity anyone will ever offer me for the rest of my life to do a job. And I said, no, thank you.
Some of history's greatest achievements have been made by students who have the capacity to experiment, come up with ideas, learn, apply ideas in a way that nobody else does. And nobody knows that better than Seth Godin. Seth, guys, I'm so glad. It was a real treat to do this interview with Seth as the first in our series. He came in to help us prepare for the Surge Expo 24 at Stanford. And I'm as excited, maybe more excited about this interview with him than the fact that later we were able to get Mark Cuban and Shark Tank's engagement in the event. By the way, he is pretty famous. He has written 20 international bestsellers like The Dip, Tribes, my favorite. He did a couple of the original TED Talks with millions of views, so you might know him from that. If you don't, I'm really glad to introduce you to him. The first thing that I love about him that you should know is he has these piercing insights. He looks at what's going on in the world with technology, culture, and he figures out how can you apply what can you apply to your business in terms of marketing, sales, product design, messaging to make the biggest impact. He has been through it, not only starting Yoyodyne, that initial internet marketing company, but also starting one of the first student-run business organizations. So this is where it applies really well to us. I encourage you to listen to this whole conversation with Seth. I promise that it's worth it. You're going to find value. If you see questions that we didn't ask, let me know. Hopefully we can get a part 2. Enjoy this initial episode, number 1 in the Surge Screams podcast. I think it's an indication of things to come and conversations we can have in the future. Enjoy. Seth, it's great to see you.
Owen, how are you?
I'm doing so well. When I was in high school and college, I had 2 action figures. One was a little Spider-Man that I lost when I was probably 15. And then the other one was yours. And that's the only one that I had around. And that's, yeah, there it is. There it is. Now I've moved and I've lost it, but I'm glad that you have yours. So it's great to have you here. Something that's always stood out to me is that you have picked a different path. As much of a powerhouse as you are and as much as you can do, you've gone a different direction. You have a podcast now called Akimbo, and I love listening to it because it has this great theme song that's really playful, simple, kind of calming. And I think of it, I think that really matches your personality, or how I understand you today. And it also matches how you describe yourself. Of all the things that you can choose to describe yourself, you describe yourself as a teacher. And I think that's super interesting. But you weren't always that way. As I understand it, when you were working on your student-run business organization and things like that, you were more of a contrarian. You had more of a fiery kind of personality. I have no idea, but this is what I've heard you suggest. So let me turn it over to you with that kind of setup. And what I want to pick on is why did you decide to start a student-run business organization once you got into Tufts?
That's such a generous intro, and so many things to talk about. Okay, TSR changed my life. There's no doubt about it. I got to Tufts. Tufts was fairly expensive. A lot of people who were there because they didn't get into more famous institutions. But it was also a great laboratory for a lot of us. There were only 4,000 students. I was an engineering major, but managed to find a loophole in the catalog, so I didn't have to take any of the really hard engineering courses. So I was taking 6 courses a semester. I was learning a lot. I was meeting a lot of people. And a guy named Tommy Alperin actually started the organization. Tommy was the president of the student body, and he was always in the middle of everything. And he saw that Tufts was spending $50,000 a year on temporary employment agencies, people to be sit in for the receptionist or whatever. And he said, this is ridiculous. Why don't I let students do this? And so he started TSR. And the model of TSR was we will pay the students $8 an hour and charge the university $8.50 an hour, and everyone will be happy. And within 30 days, he had blown through all the money that he was able to get from the student government and the dean of students. It failed. Well, Tommy didn't want to give up, so what he did was he ran an ad in the Tufts Daily looking for someone to take this thing over. He didn't say how much trouble it was in. He just said, this is a job, general manager. And I applied for it, and so did a guy named Steve Dennis. I'd never met Steve before. They interviewed both of us separately. They hired both of us to do the job. We came in, and they said, you both have this job. We're introducing you to each other. We're quitting. Here are the keys. And they walked out. So I've always taken great pains to say, I didn't start TSR. I just saved TSR. And what we did in the next year, getting paid $50 a week each, because Tufts was giving us a tiny little office and handling the payroll thing, we grew to having 10% of the student body working for us. And we started a snack bar, a ticket agency, a travel service, a bagel at night in the dorm service, a coffee shop, a on-campus concert bureau, a birthday cake service, and like every week or two, I would start something new. Steve was the guy who kept us from falling off the rails. He was the grown-up in the room, and we were a great team. And over that year, we ended up building an enterprise that still exists to this day. And the reason it changed my life, partly because meeting Steve was a good thing for me, is I understood what it is to think like an actual entrepreneur, to solve interesting problems. I realized if we were going to have a typing service, I couldn't do the typing because I don't scale that way, right? I knew how to type, but if I did all the typing, then I wouldn't have time to do the other thing. And the other part that was great is I only got paid $50 a week. And the woman I'm now married to, we would go out on dates, and I would spend $8 a week on gas and $42 a week taking her out to dinner. So I was breaking even on this whole transaction. But because I couldn't make more money, there was no incentive to cut corners. There was no incentive to be boring. The incentive was, is it generative? Is it going to help the students? And how can I create the conditions to build something that's going to grow? So the biggest message that I have for the people who are watching this, and I'm so thrilled you let me chime in, is the university you work at does not need your enterprise to do its job. That's not the thing. It's not a job. And this is the bittersweet feeling I have when I go back to Tufts to talk to the people at TSR now, because the snack bar we started is still running, right? And so it's, what is that, 40 something years later. But if all you're doing is running the snack bar, you're not learning anything. You should just go work at Chick-fil-A or something. That what you need to do if you're running the student-run business is fail and learn and fail. I want to see a list of all the projects you launched that didn't work. I want to understand how are you doing the math of why this one was a good thing to do and that one wasn't. This is a magical moment because you don't have to pay for room and board more than you do any other way. And yet you can experiment. Once you leave, it's much harder to be an entrepreneur because now you've got kids to feed and everything else. So that's my passion, is when I talk about student-run businesses, is they shouldn't be student-run businesses. They should be student-run projects. Projects have a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's my rant. That's my rant.
Interesting. Okay, so let me ask just a couple of follow-up questions to make sure I really understand TSR. I haven't gotten to visit them, so hopefully we can get engaged with somebody on campus later on. I make it a habit of visiting most people that join
pretty cool.
into our group. But so you mentioned that you started all these different, what you might call projects at the time, but some of them sustained and became businesses, stuck around. And you mentioned a coffee shop, bookstore. I don't remember all of them. I'll have to go back and track and try to create a little chart with what you had. I love doing that just to see. But it sounds very consistent with what we have in our association today. A lot of the same businesses that students end up creating because this is what people need on campus. But you did all of that within like a year or two. And how did you do that? Where did you find the funds? How did you maintain like a high batting average when it came to an idea and getting it to work?
Yeah, this is the whole thing. And, we weren't copying businesses from other campuses. We were just inventing stuff. So I'll give you an example. Mm-hmm. The bagel business met all of our criteria. It employed a lot of students at hours they wanted to work. It solved a genuine student problem, and it didn't cost anything really to start. What we did was we found a bagel place that was, within a quarter of a mile away. And we said, at the end of the day, how much do bagels cost? That, it's the end of the day, 10 cents each. Okay, those little packets of cream cheese that say Philadelphia on them? Mm-hmm. Those are 6 cents each. So I think we invested $300. We got big black garbage bags. We filled them with bagels. And we got these little cream cheese. Then we made up a song. And the song is, bagels, bagels. And these people would carry the black bag like Santa Claus and walk up and down the hallways of the dorms singing the bagel song and selling a bagel and cream cheese for $1. And if it hadn't worked, we would have been out $200. But it turns out every night we made enough money to pay for 5 more nights worth of bagels. And we could pay these students who were at 8 o'clock at night, there weren't a lot of other gigs for them. We could pay them double the minimum wage. Everybody comes out ahead. Then once the bagel thing was up and running, which took 4 days, we hire a general manager, their vice president of bagels, and I'm done with that one. I go on to the next one, right? Mm-hmm. And where else in your life do you get to do that? So, the birthday cake service, we needed help from the university because we said, based on our math, every single student has a birthday once a year. So what we would like you to do is give us mailing labels for every student's home address sorted by birth date. Mm-hmm. So then 4 weeks before a kid's birthday, we would mail with a stamp a letter to their parents. And it said, your son's birthday's coming up. It's a lonely time on campus. Would you like us to bring them a birthday cake? It's $30. And we found a bakery that would sell us a cake for $10. And so we would then find a student who wanted to make $12 an hour, and they would just bring, and I don't remember the number, 30% of the people we sent a letter to mailed us a check for their kids. Who wouldn't, right? And again, everybody was happy with all of these parts of the transaction. Other things we did that took more oomph were things like setting up the coffee bar, because we needed real estate. But right. The whole mindset was, we're not here to make money from the campus. We're here to help the campus get where it's going. And they were in a pre-caffeinated condition, and we could help them become caffeinated. Everyone, again, saw a generative value in the change that we were making. So my job was to either brainstorm and invent these businesses, or mostly to solve the weird, unexpected problems that would kick in when you're launching something. Again, a huge thing. So lots of your partners have refrigerator rental businesses. And refrigerator rental on campus in 1975, before I got there, was $80 a year. They would bring a mini fridge to your dorm, and at the end of the year, they'd pick it up. Well, we discovered that you could buy one of these mini fridges for $70. So we knew that we would pay for a lifetime's worth of fridges in 1 year just by, we'd get orders and then we'd go buy them. The hard part would be delivering them, storing them, doing it again next year. And so there Steve and I are in the U-Haul rental truck filled to the top with fridges from Lechmere. And fortunately, I disobeyed one of my dad's greatest pieces of advice, which is never get the insurance when you get a rental car. We got the insurance. We parked the U-Haul on the hill on, I can't remember the name, Powder House or whatever, at Tufts, and it's a hill. And we get out of the truck and it starts going backwards and hits a Mustang and 20 refrigerators drop on top of this Mustang convertible and crush it. You can't get it right every time.
That's a perfect student-run business story.
Yeah, exactly. So I can't. That is why I went to college, to do this. I didn't go to college to learn the philosophy of mind, which was a fine course with Dan Dennett. I went to do this. And the fact that I got to do this is a gift. And if you're working at a student-run business and all you're doing is filling out forms and doing the tasks, you should go to class instead. That's not why you went to college.
Right. It sounds like this is where one of the places where you started expressing like creativity or seeing the work as an art, which is something you talk about a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
And I totally resonate with that. And I think a lot of our students will. But when you're at the height of your game and you're being really creative in a leadership role where where you're given the ability, or you work your way into, or you pick yourself to have the ability to create something new, it gets really fun. And that's what I'm hearing from you. I'm going to try, with respect to time, to ask a few questions a lot more quickly, and see how far we get with them. But
sure, this is great for me. We can do this for as much of the time as you want.
Okay. Let's see. So TSR, one question I have is, what did you learn from that experience? So you're a student, you're a leader, you're probably well respected on campus. You've got a good reputation for what you've done with TSR. People have probably heard about it. Actually, pause for 1 second. Curiosity I had is Harvard Student Agencies was going on not far away from you. So I've been to Harvard. We've hosted a couple of conferences there. I almost found Tufts. I didn't quite, but I think that it's pretty close, right? Had you heard of Harvard Student Agencies at that time?
Okay, so a couple things. First, I don't think that I was particularly well known or respected on campus, because campus still to this day rewards a certain kind of compliance, indoctrination, fitting in. Status is afforded to people who look a certain way and act a certain way and are part of a certain circle. And I wasn't any of those things. And I was okay with that mostly. It would have been nice if every once in a while someone had come over and said, here's a hug. But in general, this wasn't, the method that I was using was not a shortcut to be of significant power or influence. HSA definitely existed. We did not consider them student run because they were processing so much money from the bartending class, and I think the travel guides, but for sure the bartending class, that there were a lot of professionals who worked there. And we had zero professionals on purpose. And one of the things that happened at TSR within 4 years of us leaving is it turned into a job. That people would inherit the next, they take over the bagel year 4 or snack bar year 4, and it was their job. And they wanted to, the indoctrination is real, as you read in my book, which is, how do I get an A at doing this? Right. And the way I get an A at doing this is not, don't break the bartending class. And I think, when I used to go back on campus to speak, I don't do it anymore because it was too frustrating for everybody. I was like, you need to shut down the existing businesses and have people start again, not run existing businesses. That is an artifact. That is not why we are here. And having policies and checklists and approaches makes sense if you're running a veterinary hospital. It doesn't make sense if you're running a student-run business that exists to be student-run. So part of my rant is, why is it that the football team doesn't have a student who's the coach? Why is it that the theater doesn't have a student who's the director? That if the purpose of school is to learn something, well, the best way to learn to be a football coach is to be a football coach when you're in college. There should be no professionals on any of these extracurriculars whatsoever, because that is how you learn how to do the craft. And there were a couple of times we reached out to Harvard, but they're Harvard and they rolled their eyes at us and they're like, we're busy doing what we do. I'm like, fine, That's great, because I'm not looking for best practices. I'm looking for safe ways to fail.
Safe ways to fail. That's the theme. I'm going to ask a couple follow-up questions for my own sake, and I think for our audience too. But so Harvard has been very generous lately. We've been happy to get them involved because they wanted to figure out how can we share and learn from more people, which I think is a different attitude than maybe you would run into at that time. So I often think about it in the groups that we support, like there are two categories of learner. And I feel like the students are working their way up a spectrum sometimes. I spent a while early on trying to figure out what makes an entrepreneur, and one of the stats that stood out to me is 6 out of 10 or more, their parents were entrepreneurial or were an entrepreneur. And so that exposure gives you a sense of confidence, or it opens you up to the idea that you can try and fail and be okay. And I think a lot of people, they're not there yet, or they're working their way there, or they have a different way of thinking about it. So sometimes I think like we're helping everyone get exposure. We're helping some people learn how to be effective and learn from some best practices. But then ideally, the organization is designed in a way where people that are encouraged to become, or people that want to become, have the opportunity to be truly creative in the way that you suggest. So I guess the question that I have is, here's the question that I have. TSR is still around, but I did notice that it's run into a lot of challenges. I think it's gotten significantly smaller. A lot of our organizations do. How do you think about like the challenge of keeping these things around and the role of an administrator when it comes to the idea of saying, hey, we want this to be here in 30 years, or we want more students to have these opportunities and these experiences? The book that you referenced just a minute ago, Stop Stealing Dreams, you were, I'm wrapping some things in here, but you were very, I think that came out, I think it was after a TEDx talk that I did that got me my job and the funding we raised to start a center for experiential learning the first time. But it was kind of in your face, like, hey, the way that we are teaching people now has all these problems. And it's one of the radical ideas you put out was that all tests and quizzes should be open book. There should be nothing that people don't have access to when we're asking them questions. Today with ChatGPT, I think that's super interesting and way more true than it ever was. But some people are still resisting going the other way. But anyway, you were really challenging how learning is set up in general. So one of the ideas that I love about student-run businesses is maybe it's part of an alternative. But in order to do that, you need some scale. You need some administration. So talk to me about the role of administrators. How do they create enough structure to keep these things going, but still respect like the boundaries that you're setting?
Stuart Brand, who is a genius, founded the Whole Earth Catalog, founded one of the first online communities. Now he's working at bringing the mammoth back from extinction. He's a character. Stuart wrote a short essay, or I gave a talk actually at the Long Now Foundation. And he said, if we look at a map of Boston from 100 years ago, except for the Big Dig, all the roads are the same. None of the roads of Boston have changed, but every single building has either been upgraded or replaced. It's very hard to change a road, but buildings are built to eventually need to be refreshed. So it feels to me like what the administration's job is to do, and Harvard has been doing this for hundreds and hundreds of years. They were founded before Galileo died, which is a good way to understand the the epochs here. You're building roads that are going to be around for a very long time. And you've got to be comfortable swapping in and out buildings. And so we have a student-run business on campus. And we have something in place to make sure that those student-run businesses will be supported. But we don't know exactly what student-run business is going to be running next year. Because we are not counting on them to run the snack bar. That's a professional's job. What we know is we're going to have folks self-identify, prove themselves, whatever, and then give them the keys to something that will amplify their work in a way that if it fails, no one's going to be harmed. And so if I was running a program like that, what I would do is early on, I'd figure out how to get 50 people into a cohort. I would run some orientation for them. I'd figure out how they could write original business plans. I'd put them into cohorts with each other to challenge each other. From that mass, 5, 6, 7 people would bubble up. And I would say, okay, you can be in charge of the business you wrote a plan for, and you can be in charge of this. And here's a tiny bit of resources to help you get started. And if it doesn't work, no one will know. And if it does work, you get all the credit. And that business, if it starts to really thrive, if we professionalize it, we'll pay you a prize. If we don't professionalize it, you can still declare victory. Next. And if every year I know we're going to do that, then it's like art school. I don't know what the paintings are going to be. I just know there's going to be painters. Right.
Okay. So thank you for elaborating on the question a little bit. I appreciate where you're coming from and the idea that our job is to lay the roads or maintain the roads. And then what we have to do is be open and let the students lead and truly be creative and come up with new approaches, treat it as a project. I want to work to a close here. And the question I'd like you to take me through is this. As much as you talk about the idea of being creative, and you don't say to follow your passion or to find your passion, because you point out that it's much easier to become passionate about what you're doing than to go find your passion. But it feels contrasting, but you often also say, look, you need to find a way to make money. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't make money. If you're good at these things, you should make lots of money. You should be successful. And you exhibited that in your career early on. You went from the student-run business program to starting your own company. I think it took some time, but you got to a point where you sold it, and it really set off your career. You also leveraged it to get into Stanford, which is where we'll be doing our conference this year. And tell me about that. How did you go from here to Stanford and use that to build your career? And what lessons do you have that you learned from it that you might share with our students? What might you have done differently?
Okay, so there are two parts to your question. Great question. The first part is, how do you make a lot of money? And the way you make a lot of money is by solving difficult problems for people who have a lot of money. And there are difficult problems that should be solved for people who don't have any money. I hope you will spend time working on those. But the people who get paid money are getting paid by people who have money to spend to solve a problem. And so if I'm offering you at 9 o'clock at night, after you've had some recreational time, a bagel for $1, and you think it's worth $2, you will buy it from me. And if I can do that often enough, I will make money doing so. And that doesn't mean you have to pick a money-making project that you can point to and say to your mom, this is my life's work. Because your life's work could be you wrote an opera. But you're paying the bills by solving problems for people who need them solved. That the garbage folks in my town who work so hard make over $100,000 a year, and they deserve every penny of it. Because nobody else wants to do what they do as well as they do it. And there's nothing to be ashamed about. They figured out how to spend 7 hours a day solving a problem for a town, and to get paid fairly to do so. Are they passionate about picking up garbage? I have no idea. Maybe they are, but there's still plenty of other hours in the day to do a thing that lights them up, that lifts them, that takes them somewhere. Okay. So I had a problem after TSR. And my problem was I was getting a degree in mechanical engineering, applied mathematics, and philosophy with a minor in computer science. And I wasn't good at any of those things because I had gone to school to learn to think, not to go to a vocational school. So the only place I was going to get interviews coming out of Tufts was big military industrial complexes who wanted me to look at top secret documents and write little tiny mechanical engineering notes. And my ears would bleed if I did that for more than an hour. And I was too young, I thought, to be the kind of bootstrapping entrepreneur I had just practiced being at school. And today it would have been totally different, because the access people have to tools today is fundamentally transformed from what it was in 1982. In 1982, you couldn't transact with a customer unless you had a building. I mean, it was that clear. There was no Shopify. There was no Google. You couldn't get found. You couldn't build this. There was no way to serve anybody. So I built some real, actual profit-making companies in college, but it was really a hard slog. So the obvious step was to take advantage of the fact that my parents' generosity would enable me to go to business school and leave without debt. And my student-run business experience made my application really compelling. Steve and I both decided to go to business school, and I realized that if we both applied to both Stanford and Harvard, one of us might get into both and one of us might get into neither, and that would be bad for both of us. So we flipped a coin. Steve got Harvard, which was better for him. I got Stanford, which was better for me. Amazingly, we both got it. And my goal in going to Stanford was not to learn a thing. I did not go there to learn anything. I went there to get the job that would be the bridge to me becoming an entrepreneur. I needed a actual job doing actual company kind of stuff where I wasn't in charge, but where I wasn't just doing tasks. And somewhere between the 2 years at business school, I got offered a job as assistant to the president of Activision, which at the time was the fastest growing company in the history of the world. But the woman I ended up marrying at the last minute said she's not coming to California, so I shifted gears. I ended up with this little company in Boston called Spinnaker. And it was run by two MBAs, really smart guys, and we grew really fast. And I was a brand manager. I was just the right amount over my head. And this time I had people counting on me and I had money to spend. And I just didn't want to let them down. I got to work with Arthur C. Clarke and Ray Bradbury and Michael Crichton. And I loved science fiction. Here I was making computer games. But as I was doing this work, I was never saying to myself, I am going to do this work forever. What I was saying to myself is, I love doing projects. If I get someone to pay me to do projects going forward, I will work for anybody who will do that. But I'm not in love with graphic adventure games. I'm in love with doing projects. And there were 5 other brand managers. They liked doing their job. I liked doing projects. And I got to see what grown-ups who did their job spent their days doing. And that was a huge insight for me, because I realized there was a well-lit path for Stanford MBAs who did their job. And so what I did at the end of that summer is they offered me this job to stay in Boston, but I flew back to California every week or two to sort of show up at class. Finally, a professor took pity on me and he said, we'll just give you a degree, write a business case study about what you're doing, which was very nice of him. And I
escaped undergrad too,
and never went back to campus. Didn't go to my graduation. But this journey of why you are in school has nothing to do with, are you going to get a certificate so you can do a job? Because if you sign up for that, given the tumult and turbulence that we are going to be facing because of all the shifts in our world, I think you're going to be uncomfortable from now on, because you're not going to get insulation like a bank manager used to get. You're not going to get a job where that piece of paper lets you stay for 20 years as you work your way up. If you can learn to do projects, it doesn't matter what the world throws at you. There's always going to be an interesting problem to solve. And that is the commitment that led me. And then I got, 7 years of no success whatsoever. 7 years of my projects not working at all, being really close to bankruptcy. Every time I was about to give up, I would sell something that's just enough money to keep going. And I wouldn't trade any of it, because I learned so much from that journey as well. And that led to starting one of the first internet companies. And that's when I sold it to Yahoo. After I got to Yahoo, it was the Renaissance, 1999. The world was going in very interesting directions. I knew I couldn't stay for a whole bunch of other reasons, but I got an offer from Bill Gross, who started Idea Lab. Idea Lab and Bill were the people who invented what became AdSense, invented the engine that made Google all that money. And Bill, more than me, even liked inventing projects. He would invent an internet company every week, and the way Idea Lab worked is it was a big room with circles of desks. His desk was in the middle. Then the businesses he invented were right around there. And then each few weeks you had to move farther and farther away your desk from where Bill was. And once you were at the farthest periphery, your business either worked or didn't, and you were out of the building. Anyway, Bill said, the internet is real. I need you to be my VP of marketing. And he offered me, I'm not making this up, $1 billion in stock options. And I looked at the opportunity and I said, this is going to be the best opportunity anyone will ever offer me for the rest of my life to do a job. And I said, no, thank you. And it turns out that the company didn't make it through the bubble. And if the bubble had lasted 2 more months, they would have gone public and it would have worked out. But that's not why I made the right decision. I made the right decision because once you've turned down $1 billion to do a job, it makes it easy to not do jobs anymore. Because there's no job that's more compelling than that one. You should do projects instead.
And you were well prepared for that. And that's what you've been doing.
Yeah.
Let me, one final question, and then I want to kind of give you the stage, so to speak, and share with, our audience, our students, the folks that are helping to, as administrators, supporters for this kind of program, whatever you might have to say to them that you think would be helpful, encouraging. Seth Godin magic. The last question that I kind of have for you is, you have really, for the past at least 15 years, probably more, as I mentioned earlier, proposed an alternative way of approaching education. And it centers on these kinds of projects, something that I definitely strongly associate you with. If we are able to create a world where that becomes much more the norm, and to me, it's how can we help more students have the opportunity to learn by starting and leading projects, businesses, things that go wherever they want to take them? What would be different? How do you think things would be different? And I appreciate what you pointed out, which is since then, 10, 15 years ago to today, it's even more clear that this is critical. The pace of change has picked up just like they thought it would. This is so much. But yeah, tell me your thoughts on that. What would be different if this is the norm?
All right, well, most people watching this probably don't know who Frederick Taylor was. Frederick Taylor bumped into a guy named Henry Ford about 110 years ago.
Taylorism.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
And Ford had this idea for the assembly line, but Taylor had this idea for the stopwatch. And Taylor said, humans are machines. If we can find an actual machine to replace a human, we should do that. If we can't, we should still treat them like a machine. Their job is to do a series of tasks. And he stood there with a stopwatch and he measured everything. And the word jerk evolved because when someone visited the Ford plant, they reported that it looked like people were marionettes getting jerked this way and that each motion with their hand was controlled. The term human resources exists because humans are a resource, a machine to be measured, and they must comply. That org charts have square boxes on them because we're saying to someone, you fill this box, but lots of other people are square too. So we can take you out and put somebody else in that box if they don't fit. And it's very difficult for people to realize the culture didn't know what to do with this back then. That in Manchester, England, when the assembly line arose, they didn't have coffee carts that went up and down the aisles. They had gin carts because people were basically drunk the whole day. It was the only way to tolerate what was being done to the human condition. And it took generations before people said, this is normal, that I'm just doing my job. That's a new expression. And so we built this whole culture where we've been taught that it's normal. The same way fish aren't sure there's really water, we're not really sure that this was put on us, but it was. But if you look at humans when they don't have this over them, they don't live life like this. And if we look at Marshall Salin's breakthrough book about the economy of the caveman, which he wrote in the 60s, Turns out that hunter-gatherers, a lot of research, work between 2 and 3 hours a day. They collect what they need to collect, and they spend the rest of their time in community. They spend the rest of their time engaging with each other as people, not being a resource for a company. So here we are now with the most incredible steam shovel ever built being offered to just about everybody for free, which is that this $1 trillion AI thing that's been 50 years in the making, you can now have it. Here, take it. And if you do mediocre work at anything, I can get an AI to do it for me for free. So the idea of tasks and jobs, it's just going to keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So we can then shrink our way to nothing, or we can say, this is amazing. We have set the stage for projects, for generative, creative initiative. But having worked with thousands and thousands of people, what I see is people don't know what it even means to take initiative. So I'll give you an example of this. You know that drinking, the bird that goes back and forth? It's a little kid's toy. Can you visualize that?
Yep.
All right, so I'm sitting with 5 kids between 10 and 14 years old. Everyone is an A student. I set the thing up and I say, how's it work? I said, I'll answer your general questions. How does it work? And they look at it and they look at it and then they take out their notebooks and they say, tell us. And they're ready to write down the answer. I said, no, I'm not going to tell you. You have
I thought they were Googling it.
Yeah, that's right. That would be the modern answer.
Yeah.
But if you don't know how to reason your way through something you don't understand, what are you going to do when the world shows up in a way you don't understand? If you're waiting for the manual and the checklist, we have a problem. We need that for pilots and for nurses and for pediatric surgeons, but we don't need it for whatever it is you're training to do. So I think this is urgent. This is not about helping people make money. It's about the purpose of the institution to begin with. And that's why I don't think it's just for the HSAs and the TSRs of the world. I think it's for the philosophy department, and I think it's for the engineering school, which is how do we create the conditions for people to engage in pathfinding and project making, not in instruction following.
They're learning to take initiative, to deal with all the craziness that's going on, the rate of change, and to find a way to interact with it that's going to create a positive result. And if they don't get that practice, that opportunity, then when they're confronted with situations that really call on it, they won't know what to do. It'll be very difficult. I'm just
going to interject one thing here. Yeah. Because I'm really enjoying the conversation. I'm fine if we want to just keep talking, but it's up to you. I gave a talk to a bunch of administrators of community colleges. And I don't cry very often on stage, but this time I did. Because I finished my talk, which covered a lot of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And this woman who had spent years running a community college raises her hand and she said, well, that might be fine for the people you know. But these people, the people I'm saddled with, they can't handle it. And I'm like, boy, those kids, their parents, this community, the one that trusted you to turn on a light for people, how dare you? How dare you show up at work and waste your days and theirs talking about those people? I don't know how you label them that, by their appearance, by social standing, by caste, but how dare you? And some of the people watching this might be on a community college level. It doesn't matter. I have done this work with 11-year-olds. This is about indoctrination. It is not about what your parents did.
Right. Yeah. So your point there is to say that this vision for an alternative way and an important way to help people learn and experience the world is for everybody. And it's not just for the most talented. It's not for the people that are coming from a certain part of society, but it's something that everyone can and should learn. And I think, in fact, and I think you would agree, it's the natural way for us to learn. I always think there was this paper, The Genetic Epistemology by Piaget. I don't know if you've read it. but the example he used on how a child learns is by throwing something off of their place onto the ground. How does this bounce? And that's how we evolved to learn. This is us thriving, and we like take that away. Right. But that's really, I think, at the root of when you talk about these projects and things. That's what it is: just throwing things onto the floor.
Yeah, I mean, we call them toddlers because they toddle, and I've never met a kid who couldn't walk because they gave up because they were bad at walking at first. But everybody is bad at walking at first. Yeah. But we create the conditions to keep walking. And the scaffolding we have built to create a PhD in English literature is too big. There's too much scaffolding there. And we need to move some of the scaffolding away from this is the grooved path and the requirements and everything else to we've got your back here at least for 4 years. If you don't hurt anybody, we're not going to hurt you. You got to go solve some interesting problems and we're not going to tell you how.
Yeah. So I have, I have a really technical question that I could ask you in terms of how we actually get this done. And so specifically, like, it's in relation to credentials, right? I know that you're not a huge fan of credentials. Of course, I'm not either. I say of course, but I'm not.
Badges are not the same as credentials, but go ahead. Tell me about your badges.
Well, yeah. The fundamental question that I'm asking is, in today's society, I thought 15 years ago, in the future, we will not need credentials. It will be based on our abilities, our achievements in the past, our skills today, things like that. That didn't pan out. We're still in a world where people need to see credentials. In order to get through the machines, the robots that are looking at your resume, you need things on that resume. And without them, you just won't get through the system. How do you think about that challenge? And yeah, I mentioned the badge program to you that we're working on for the SRBA. The idea is to try to design a kind of credential where what comes first is your activities, your output. The work that you do on your projects, do whatever you want. And we're going to capture it and try to translate it into a degree, into a credential. Right. But how do you think about that? How do we deal with this issue where the best way to learn, the best way to live is through this creativity, these projects, but we need credentials to move around?
No, it's a great question. And I have so many advantages and so much privilege. I won the parent lottery. I have a degree semi-earned from one of the most famous business schools in the world. You give a TED talk, you write a bestseller. These are all credentials. And it would be better if you could simply show your work. But as you are pointing out, there is a filter that is being built because there's too many people, particularly in times of massive income inequality, trying to get in. And so you just put up this filter and say, if you don't have this credential, we're not even going to look at you. And, they've basically Tinderized job hunting, where a good job gets 2,000 applications in 3 hours. So of course, the people who are doing it are just going to, build a hard filter, a comb filter, and you're out. My grandmother used to keep the copy of Playboy magazine that I was in on her coffee table because she had trouble explaining to her friends what I did for a living.
You said the copy of Playboy magazine that you read.
I was in Playboy magazine in 1984. It was the Women of Mensa issue, if you want to look it up. I think that if I was offered the opportunity, knowing what I know about Playboy today, I would say no, but it was my job and it was Playboy. I'm like, well, how cool was that for a 24-year-old? Anyway, so she would describe me to her friends as a freelancer. And that meant she didn't know what I did. But what is a freelancer? Freelancer is a soldier for hire who is not part of a guild. And the guilds were super important as a credential. If you were a member of the plumbing guild, you could do plumbing, and if you weren't, you couldn't. So if we're going to create these new credentials, we have to think about the network effect that comes from building a guild. So when I built the Alt MBA, basically my idea was to completely rethink what was possible in online education. That Udemy is fine, And masterclass is sort of dumb, but not just entertainment and videos, but actual cohort-based learning. So I invented online cohort-based learning in a way that was transformative. 7,400 people ended up going through the program over time.
Yeah.
And what we tried
to... It is the Alt MBA, right?
Sorry?
Is that the Alt MBA?
That was the Alt MBA, yeah.
That is, yeah.
The Alt MBA had its last class last week. So it's come to its conclusion, but enough people have copied the model that I feel good about the thing. Yeah. The idea was, here's your badge to put on LinkedIn. We're going to establish that going through the Alt MBA is a credential. So we were graduating more people every year than Stanford, and we could show it had huge efficacy.
Yeah.
7,400 people in a few years is not enough time to catch up to Harvard. That these network effects, this guild effect, needs to be done with more intent. That people like us do things like this. That we're reaching out to people who have been through what we've been through because we register with each other. Mm-hmm. You'll see the same thing happen much less formally if someone who loves running marathons interviews someone who runs the marathon. They're much more likely to hire that person because they know what that person's been through and what kind of person sticks with it.
Yeah.
And so these informal guilds can be amplified by what the internet is capable of. And, TEDx built an entire community of people, which is now in the hundreds of thousands. Those people have a credential, etc. So these informal credentials will inevitably catch up to the elite, overpriced, luxury good, famous colleges. Mm-hmm. Because the famous colleges are bankrupting a lot of people, and free is really compelling. So as we create project groups that amplify, they spread. And I think another example is Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous isn't anonymous. Everyone knows what it is. Nobody knows where their headquarters are. No one knows who's in charge because no one is. It's an algorithm. It is a method. It is an informal guild. And so it's, are you on the bus? People like us do things like this. That is what badges can start us down the road to doing in inventing a new kind of credential.
Right. I see. Yeah. I remember when Alt MBA came out, I felt like I was going to need to write a book on education and everything that it could be. Stop Stealing Dreams came out, and I said, I am not going to write a book. Because it was just so exactly what I wanted to say, plus more. And I'm so glad that you came out with that. And at that time, I started thinking, what would an ideal system look like? And then you came out with the Alt MBA, and I thought, this is just incredible. Super interesting approach. But the Alt MBA, like many projects you mentioned, it has a start and an end. So there's nothing wrong with that. But to make sure I understand what you're saying, it's that it will take time, and it's going to take a lot of community building and maybe a lot of support from folks that are our membership, for example. Yeah. Students that are at some of the top schools, many of other schools, building a community to say, we recognize your potential, your achievements, what you've done that are different, but really incredible. And we want to celebrate those with each other for you. We want to hire each other. We want to support each other, recommend each other. So it's about creating that community, and that's what's going to eventually these badges and these.
Yeah, I mean, let's think about Harvard Business School didn't matter one bit until 1954. So that was only 70 years ago. And the first thing that happens, big difference between Harvard and Stanford, the first thing that happens the first day of the first class at Harvard Business School is they elect the alumni representative. Think about that. They're not going to graduate for 2 more years. They've already elected their group's alumni representative because the whole thinking is people like us do things like this. Then they invent the Baker Scholars to create hierarchy and status roles within the cohort, right? But the label of HBS is if you work at Goldman which, by the way, Salomon Brothers in the 1970s, most of the partners hadn't gone to college. Think about that, right? But then the status ratchet kicks in. We don't want people who haven't been to college. We want MBAs. Oh, we don't want just MBAs. We want Harvard MBAs. We don't want just Harvard MBAs. We want Baker Scholars. And so the ratcheting comes with them. Right. And so we get to invent these things. And that's one of the things that the Alt MBA did. Is I just announced that a whole cloth. The Alt MBA is a thing. One of the things we gave every graduate is one of these challenge coins. And we could talk about challenge coins all day long. But the challenge coin, you get this at graduation. And the magic of it is it signifies to you that you did a thing. You got a solid thing. You are one of us. Yeah. And it has changed people's lives to be able to say to themselves and then to other people, oh yeah, I had the guts to go do that. And this all becomes additive. It doesn't take a year. It takes a long time. And what I know about myself is I like solving an interesting problem, but I didn't want to stick around Tufts and run TSR for a living. And I didn't want to stick around the Alt MBA and keep building the community there, because that's not my job. My job is the project.
Well, I love what you just said here, and I think it's super powerful and very prescient for our membership, for example, because one thing that stands out to me is that the folks that have gone through the leadership for these student orgs, I would hire them in a heartbeat, right? And I think we all say that about each other. I know what you've been through, the trauma, the challenges of being in charge when you're this young. It's so much. And so we believe in each other. But we've really struggled nationally to cultivate that alumni community that you're talking about. And it's clearly the next step, something that we need to be focusing on for each other. But when it's done, it's going to be powerful because of exactly what I said. We trust each other. We know what we've been through and that we can have confidence. So, yeah, I look forward to seeing more of these communities take off. Let me, out of respect for your time, of course, someday I would love to talk to you again. I have family up near you, actually, in Pleasantville. So I was like, oh, this is so neat. But I want to give us a wrap up. If there's anything else that you would like to say, Gary will help us edit this and present it to the group. Like I mentioned, we'll have a few hundred folks in the audience. They're administrators and student leaders. I think what you've said has been terrific. But if there's anything else, I want to just give you a second. You're welcome to say it.
You think you figured it out. You come up with the answer, and then the world changes. And that's always going to happen. This world we live in today is completely bonkers. It's upside down. It's out of control. And this is as normal as the world will ever be again. Both of those things are true. And one of the reasons people go to work as administrators in hundreds-year-old institutions is because it's pretty straightforward what you do. People like us do things like this, what it's like around here. And one of the reasons that people go to elite educational institutions is because you can get an A. And what I'm saying is neither of those things is going to get you very far anymore. So right here in the safety, in the womb that you have surrounded yourself with, what a great gymnasium to practice for chaos. Because chaos isn't just a good idea. It's the law. It's happening and it's coming in every corner, which means that leaders are going to show up. We can either panic and say it's all going to hell and we lose, or we can make things better. And the way you do that is by practicing. And you can practice with bagels. Doesn't matter. You don't need best practices. You just need to practice. And that will make you resilient for the next time you have to do it.
Awesome. Thank you, Seth, so much. I really appreciate it. So glad that you responded and just had some faith in a cold email.
You're doing good work. It was a pleasure to support you guys. Keep making a ruckus.